Well, I agree with you strongly that there should be an inquiry into how governments handle the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And as we know, instead of following traditional practice, that is, looking after those who are vulnerable, and this virus was very convenient on that point because we knew who was vulnerable. We didn't know in relation to certain other pandemics that have come to Australia. And what they should have done, it was so obvious, common sense and precedent would have told them that they should have looked after the vulnerable and let the rest of us get on with our lives, just advising us to take certain precautions, but not to go into the madness that they went into. And worse, to do that, they took advantage of the checks and balances which are just no longer there in relation to making regulations. In colonial times in Australia, it was normal for the power to make significant regulations to be with the governor in council, and for that to go through a process where things could be checked. The public would know that there was a good argument for this, and we always had a system that these would be disallowable by either house. And in those days, Queensland still had a second house, so it was a very good system, but all of that has been swept away, and that's also something which should be considered. There's one other thing that I wanted to know whether you think a Royal Commission should look at, and that is, should they also be looking at the responsibility of Beijing for this virus, for not informing the world of it, for letting it escape from effectively a laboratory under the control of the military? Should there be some inquiry into that, or should the inquiry extend to that, but also to how we can have compensation from Beijing for the terrible damages we suffered as a result of that?
Well, I think there are two separate issues here, David. One is the Australian response to the pandemic, and the other is how the pandemic actually started. Now, I would certainly like, as far as is humanly possible, for us to get to the bottom of how this damn thing originally happened. Did it emerge from a wet market in Wuhan, as we originally thought, or was it in fact an engineered virus that somehow escaped from the laboratory there in Wuhan? I do think it is a very strange coincidence that this thing emerged from the very city where all of this research was taking place. And we all know that laboratory accidents do happen from time to time. And so I think there's a plausibility in the laboratory leak hypothesis. Obviously, the Chinese government is doing everything it can to resist that investigation, and it seems to, at least to a large measure, have thwarted the World Health Organization investigation. I haven't actually had a chance to read in depth the book that's been put out on this topic, but certainly I think a lot of us do want to get to the bottom of that. Frankly, though, David, I think for Australia, the most important thing is trying to work out whether it was our response, the overreaction that I think, and try to ensure that next time something like this happens, because there will be further pandemics, whether it's in a year, a decade or a century, there will be further pandemics. I think we owe it to our successors to look at how we handled this thing and try to decide what actually, with the wisdom of hindsight, should have been done and what possibly should not have been done